Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're the place where we really dig into the fundamental research on why humans act the way they do politically.
Yeah, we take the core studies, the big ideas, and try to boil them down to what really matters, what's truly fascinating.
And today, wow, we are taking on a massive topic. The very architecture of belief itself. How do we even form political ideas?
Exactly. Our mission today is to explore these core forces, often working beneath the surface, that shape our political attitudes.
Things that dictate our preferences, maybe even how we vote, how we engage as citizens. It's fundamental stuff.
It really is, and it's a critical discussion because we're looking at this inherent tension, between what we just absorb automatically, almost passively.
Like soaking it up.
Right. And then what we actively choose to believe, or maybe what our minds actively defend.
So we're investigating how attitudes form and change, but through some specific lenses.
Yes, three key theoretical lenses today.
Right.
First, the passive, almost automatic world of classical conditioning. Then we'll look at the much more active, self-protective mechanism called motivated reasoning.
That sounds intriguing. Identity defense.
Very much so. And finally, we'll step back and look at the bigger picture. The lifelong structural influence of political socialization, how society shapes us.
And to guide us through this, well, it's quite an intricate landscape, isn't it? We're relying on some serious academic work.
Absolutely. We're grounding this deep dive in foundational literature.
So on the psychology side, for conditioning, we're looking at core ideas from, I believe, Saul McLeod's work, and also how conditioning gets used in things like advertising.
That's right, looking at those basic mechanisms and their application. Then we pivot.
Towards cognitive science and political psychology.
Exactly. For motivated reasoning, we're drawing on some really groundbreaking researchers, people like Dan Kahan, Chris Mooney, Matthew Nisbet.
The ones who really highlighted how much our identity plays a role in how we even process facts.
Precisely. It's not just about logic.
And then, to tie it all together in the real world of politics.
We turn to political socialization. We're using insights from Anja Nundorf and Kat Smets, their 2017 work on the making of citizens.
And also drawing on some earlier foundational work like Virginia Sapiro's research from 2004.
Yes, putting it all into that broader context of how we become political beings over our lifetime.
So if you had to nail down the core conflict we're exploring today, what would it be?
I'd say it's this constant battle, really, between passive absorption and active self-defense.
Okay.
On one hand, you've got classical conditioning, showing how easily our minds just soak up associations, often without us even thinking about it.
The automatic stuff.
The automatic stuff. But on the other hand, you have motivated reasoning and political socialization, demonstrating how incredibly robust our minds and our social groups are at filtering information.
Filtering, rejecting.
Yeah, organizing things to protect who we think we are, our identities, our core values. It's like we build these mental fortresses.
So it's a journey from like a gut reaction.
A knee-jerk reaction, exactly, all the way to a deeply held lifelong conviction.
Okay, fascinating. Let's unpack this then. Where should we start?
Let's start at the very beginning. The most basic, fundamental way we learn anything. Just learning by association.
Right. Lay it on us.
So, we begin with classical conditioning. You might also hear it called Pavlovian conditioning or respondent conditioning.
Pavlov. Right. The name rings a bell.
Literally. Yes, the Russian physiologist Ivan Pavlov. He was exploring this systematically back in the early 20th century.
And the core idea is pretty simple.
At its heart, yes. Conditioning is just learning through association. You link two different things stimuli together, and you end up producing a new learned response. It's a cornerstone of learning theory.
But it wasn't always seen as just simple learning theory, was it?
No.
I seem to remember it being kind of radical, especially when it came to America.
Oh, absolutely. What's often forgotten is just how controversial this became, particularly through the work of John B. Watson.
Well, a father of behaviorism.
The father of radical behaviorism, yes. He took Pavlov's findings about dogs and salivation and essentially turbocharged them.
How's that?
Well, Watson proposed that this basic process of stimulus and response could explain pretty much everything about human psychology.
Everything, like emotions, thoughts, politics.
Everything. It was an extremely deterministic viewpoint, very focused on the environment. Watson basically denied that the mind or consciousness or even innate talents were really relevant.
Wow. So for him, we're just bundles of learned associations.
Pretty much. Complex feelings, opinions, your political stance, just patterns of conditioned responses built up over time.
That sounds bleak. Didn't that lead to that famous, slightly scary quote of his about being able to train any baby?
Precisely. That infamous claim from, I think, of 1924, he essentially framed human beings as these infinitely malleable machines.
What did he say exactly?
He argued, quite boldly, that if you gave him a dozen healthy infants, he could take anyone at random and train him to become any type of specialist he might select. Doctor, lawyer, artist, merchant chief.
Even a bigger man or thief.
Right. Regardless of the child's innate talents, tendencies, abilities, vocations, race of his ancestors, it was the ultimate statement of nurture over nature.
Environment is everything. Genetics is nothing.
That was the extreme behaviorist view. The environment and your learning experiences dictate your destiny, full stop.
Okay, so to really understand how this underlying process might shape attitudes, even political ones, without us realizing, we need to break down how it actually works, the stages involved.
Exactly. It's systematic. There are 3 distinct stages to classical conditioning.
Stage 1.
Stage 1 is before conditioning. This is the baseline. Here we have what's called an unconditioned stimulus, or UCS.
Unconditioned meaning, unlearned, natural.
Exactly. It's something that automatically, naturally triggers a response without any prior learning. This response is the unconditioned response, or UCR. It's a reflex.
Like food making you salivate.
Perfect example. Or think about a stomach virus that's the unconditioned stimulus naturally causing nausea, the unconditioned response. Just happens.
Okay, so UCS leads to UCR. What else is there before conditioning starts?
There's also the neutral stimulus, the NS. This is something in the environment that, at this stage, produces no relevant response at all.
So using your virus example, maybe. The specific restaurant where you ate the bad food. Initially, the restaurant itself doesn't make you nauseous.
Precisely. Or in a political context, maybe it's the sight of a specific party's logo or hearing a certain politician's name. Initially, it's just neutral information. It doesn't automatically trigger a strong feeling.
Got it. UCS dash UCR, and the NS does nothing yet. What's stage 2?
Stage 2 is the critical phase. During conditioning, this is where the learning happens.
The association gets built.
Exactly. In this stage, the neutral stimulus, let's stick with the party logo, is repeatedly paired with the unconditioned stimulus.
So maybe you see the party logo constantly associated with news reports about that stomach virus outbreak, or perhaps associated with economic good times.
Could be either. The key thing research found is that conditioning works best when the neutral stimulus occurs just before the unconditioned stimulus.
Why is that timing important?
Because the neutral stimulus starts to act as a predictive cue. It signals that the unconditioned stimulus is coming. The logo starts to predict either the bad feeling, nausea, or the good feeling, economic security.
Ah, okay. So the brain learns, see logo, expect X.
Exactly. And with enough of these pairings, the neutral stimulus successfully transforms. It's no longer neutral. It becomes the conditioned stimulus, or CS.
Conditioned meaning learned.
Learned. It has acquired meaning through association.
Which takes us to stage 3.
Stage 3. After conditioning. Now, the learning is complete. The former neutral stimulus, now the conditioned stimulus,
The party logo.
can trigger a response all by itself, even without the original unconditioned stimulus being present.
And then this new response is the conditioned response?
Correct. The conditioned response, or CR, this CR is usually similar to, though sometimes weaker than, the original unconditioned response.
So if the logo, CS, was paired with economic trauma, UCS, which caused anxiety, the UCR.
Then just seeing the logo later, CS could trigger feelings of anxiety or unease, CR, all on its own.
Wow. And conversely, if a candidate's theme song, initially NS, is always played during uplifting rallies with cheering crowds, UCS causing feelings of excitement, UCR.
Then eventually, just hearing that theme song, now the CS, could trigger feelings of optimism or excitement, the CR, even if you hear it totally out of context, like on the radio.
You can see how powerful that would be in politics or advertising. It bypasses conscious thought.
It absolutely does. And the research delves deeper than just this initial learning. There are several core principles that explain how these learned associations stick around, or fade, or spread.
Okay, what are those?
Well, first is acquisition. That's simply the initial stage of learning, successfully pairing the NS and UCS until the CS reliably produces the CR. The link is formed.
But it's not necessarily permanent, right?
Correct. That brings us to extinction. This happens when the conditioned stimulus is presented repeatedly without the unconditioned stimulus.
So Pavlov keeps ringing the bell, but no food ever comes.
Exactly. The dog gradually stops salivating to the bell alone. The conditioned response weakens and eventually disappears because the bell no longer predicts food. The association is unlearned or perhaps suppressed.
But is it gone forever?
Interestingly, maybe not completely. There's a phenomenon called spontaneous recovery.
Sounds dramatic.
It's kind of neat. After a rest period where the CS hasn't been presented at all, if you suddenly present the CS again.
Ring the bell after a few weeks off.
Right. The extinguished conditioned response can temporarily reappear, often in a weaker form. It suggests the original learning wasn't totally erased, just inhibited.
So those old political jingles might still spark a faint feeling years later, even if you thought you were over it.
Could be. Then we have two related concepts: how specific or broad the learning is. Generalization is the tendency for a stimulus that's similar to the original conditioned stimulus to also elicit the conditioned response.
So if Pavlov used a specific bell tone, the dog might also salivate, maybe less strongly, to a slightly higher or lower pitched bell.
Exactly. Or, in politics, a positive feeling conditioned to one candidate might generalize to other candidates from the same party who look or sound similar.
But we can also learn to tell things apart, right?
Yes, that's discrimination. This is the learnability to distinguish between the original conditioned stimulus and other similar stimuli.
So the dog learns only the specific bell tone means food and ignores other sounds.
Correct. Or you learn that the specific shade of red in a logo is associated with your party, but a slightly different shade belongs to the opposition. You learn to respond only to the precise cue.
Generalization spreads it, discrimination narrows it. Makes sense. Is there anything else?
One more important concept, especially for symbols: higher order conditioning, sometimes called second order conditioning.
Higher order, like layers.
Exactly like layers. This happens when an already established conditioned stimulus is paired with a new neutral stimulus.
Okay.
So the original CS, like Pavlov's bell, can act almost like an unconditioned stimulus itself, transferring its power to the new NS.
How would that work?
Imagine the bell, CS1, reliably causes salivation, CR. Now, you consistently flash a black square, new NS, right before ringing the bell, CS1.
Okay, pair the square with the bell.
After enough pairings, the black square alone, now CS2, might start to cause salivation, even though the square itself was never directly paired with the original food, UCS.
The association got transferred one step further away from the original source.
Precisely. And think about political symbols. Imagine a national flag, CS1, has already been conditioned, maybe through school or cultural events, to evoke feelings of patriotism, CR.
Right, that's a common one.
Now, a political campaign constantly pairs their candidate's image or logo, new NS, with the flag, CS1.
You see that all the time. Candidates standing in front of flags.
Over time, the candidate's image itself, now CS2, could start to evoke those feelings of patriotism directly, even when the flag isn't physically present. That's higher order conditioning in action.
That layering effect really explains a lot about political branding and why campaigns are so careful about the symbols they associate with. It's all about borrowing that pre-existing emotional weight.
It's a powerful, often subconscious mechanism.
Okay, so we got the basics down. Now let's talk about where this really hits home. The real-world applications and maybe the darker side of conditioning. You mentioned pathology.
Yes, conditioned emotional responses are absolutely central to understanding things like phobias.
Phobias, like irrational fears.
Exactly. Think back to John B. Watson and his, well, frankly, ethically dubious Little Albert experiment.
Yes, Little Albert. What did they do again?
They took an infant, Albert, who initially wasn't afraid of a white rat, NS. Then they repeatedly paired the sight of the rat with a loud, frightening noise, UCS, which naturally made Albert cry, UCR. Soon, just seeing the white rat, now CS, made Albert cry and show fear, CR. And worse, this fear generalized.
Generalized. To what?
He became afraid of other furry things. A rabbit, a dog, even a Santa Claus mask with white fur. The conditioned fear spread.
That's disturbing, but it clearly shows how phobias could develop through association. What about trauma?
Critically important there. In post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, we see this mechanism very clearly.
How so?
During a traumatic event combat, an assault, a natural disaster, there are numerous neutral stimuli present. Sights, sounds, smells, things that were just part of the environment.
Okay, just background details at the time.
But because they were present during the intense fear and pain, the UCS causing the UCR of terror, these previously neutral elements become powerful conditioned stimuli.
So later on.
Later on, encountering one of those triggers, a specific smell, a loud bang, a certain location can involuntarily unleash the conditioned response. Intense panic, anxiety, flashbacks, hypervigilance. The trigger brings the trauma response flooding back.
That highlights the involuntary nature of these conditioned responses. It's not something you choose to feel.
Not at all. And we see a similar involuntary power in addiction, specifically with cue reactivity.
Cue reactivity, what's that?
It's a huge area of research in substance abuse. Think about smoking. The drug itself, nicotine, is the unconditioned stimulus. It causes physiological effects, maybe pleasure or relaxation, the UCR.
Okay, the direct effect of the drug.
But people don't use drugs in a vacuum. There are environmental cues consistently associated with drug use.
That's the place they usually smoke, certain friends they smoke with, the time of day.
Exactly. All those things start as neutral stimuli, but through repeated pairing with nicotine intake, the UCS, they become conditioned stimuli.
So what happens when the person encounters those cues later, even if they're trying to quit?
Those cues, seeing the place, meeting the friend, reaching that time of day automatically trigger craving and physiological arousal. That's the conditioned response. It's an intense urge to use the drug, making relapse incredibly difficult.
And there's solid evidence for this.
Oh, yes. Meta-analyses, like the one by Carter and Tiffany mentioned in our sources, confirm very strong cue reactivity in individuals dependent on various substances. These conditioned cues are a major hurdle in recovery.
So conditioning plays a big role in negative outcomes like phobias, PTSD, addiction. But it's also used intentionally, right? To shape our preferences as consumers or voters.
Absolutely. If conditioning can create fear or craving, it can also create attraction and positive feelings. And advertisers know this very well.
This is where it gets into persuasion and manipulation.
Precisely. Conditioning is often the silent mechanism in strategic persuasion, especially in advertising and political campaigns. The goal is frequently to shape your preferences outside of your rational, conscious evaluation.
How do they do that?
By strategically pairing the product, the brand, or the political candidate, the thing they want you to like, the conditioned stimulus, with things that are already universally positive, unconditioned stimuli.
Like what? What are universal positive UCSs?
Think attractive people, cute babies or animals, uplifting or inspiring music, beautiful scenery, powerful emotional stories, symbols of success or patriotism, things that naturally evoke positive feelings, the UCR.
So you see a car ad with a stunning landscape and soaring music.
And over time, the car itself, CS, starts to evoke some of those positive feelings, CR, even if, logically, the car has nothing to do with mountains or music. They're forging an association in your mind below the level of conscious argument.
Which can then influence your choice when you're looking to buy a car or cast a vote.
It definitely can. It aims to create a gut feeling, an automatic preference.
Now, the sources we looked at raise some pretty serious ethical concerns about this kind of strategic conditioning.
They do, and it's an important discussion. The fundamental ethical concern revolves around bypassing rational decision-making.
Manipulating people without them realizing it.
That's the core critique. The concerns generally fall into 4 areas. First, just that the manipulation of consumer or political preferences without relying on reasoned arguments or factual evidence. Second, the potential encouragement of impulsive or even unhealthy behaviors. Think conditioning positive feelings towards sugary drinks or luxury goods people can't afford.
Oh. Third,
there's the concern about targeting vulnerable demographic groups, children, people with low health literacy, maybe who might be more susceptible to these kinds of emotional, non-rational cues.
Trying on vulnerabilities.
That's the worry. And finally, there's a broader philosophical critique. If our preferences can be so easily shaped by these automatic associations, what does that say about human agency?
The Watsonian view again, that we're just input-output machines.
Exactly. Taken to its extreme, this perspective can seem to reduce people to automatons reacting to stimuli, rather than conscious individuals making free choices based on values and reason. It potentially diminishes our view of human autonomy.
So conditioning lays down this powerful, often unconscious emotional foundation. Our gut reactions, our attractions, our aversions to symbols, people, ideas. But that can't be the whole story, right? What happens when we have these feelings, these associations, and then we encounter, well, a fact, a piece of information that challenges them.
Ah, now we get to the brain's defense systems. This is the perfect transition. If conditioning is like the initial, sometimes accidental programming,
Then what happens when a new piece of code conflicts with the existing program?
the system often throws up firewalls. This leads us directly into the fascinating territory of motivated reasoning.
Motivated reasoning. Okay, that sounds like thinking with a purpose. What's the motivation here?
The motivation fundamentally is self-protection, specifically protecting your existing beliefs and, crucially, your social identity.
So what is it exactly? Is it like consciously deciding to ignore facts you don't like?
Rarely is it that conscious or deliberate. Motivated reasoning is the tendency, often non-conscious, to seek out information that confirms what you already believe.
Confirmation bias.
That's part of it, yes. But it's also about how we interpret ambiguous information and how we evaluate new evidence. We tend to interpret things in a way that supports our existing views, and we're much more critical of evidence that challenges them.
Why? Why is it so important to protect these existing beliefs?
Because challenging deeply held beliefs, especially those tied to our social groups, our political party, our religion, our cultural identity, can feel threatening. It can threaten our sense of who we are and where we belong. Our worldview provides structure and meaning.
So an attack on the belief feels like an attack on the self.
In a very real psychological sense, yes. And modern neuroscience gives us some incredible insights into just how fast this defense mechanism kicks in.
Faster than conscious thought.
Much faster. We now understand that reasoning isn't this cold, detached, logical process we might imagine. It's absolutely suffused with affect, drenched in emotion.
Affect meaning. Feelings.
Feelings. Positive or negative gut reactions. Research shows that our affective response, our feeling about people, ideas, political groups, whatever, arises incredibly quickly. We're talking milliseconds.
Milliseconds. Before we've even had time to logically process the information.
Exactly. That initial gut feeling sets the course for our subsequent thinking. It biases the entire process before conscious, deliberate reasoning even gets going. The mind almost instantly starts pulling supportive information closer and pushing threatening information away.
Like an automatic sorting mechanism based on feeling.
That's a great way to put it. Arthur Lupia, a political scientist, has described this as almost a basic human survival skill.
Survival. That sounds extreme.
Well, think about it in terms of social survival. Maintaining your standing within your group, preserving your identity, these are deeply ingrained human needs. So when information threatens that identity, the response isn't necessarily intellectual curiosity.
It's psychological self-defense. Lock down the hatches.
Pretty much. Defend the core belief system.
And this leads to some really surprising findings, doesn't it? Especially around things like science literacy.
Oh, absolutely. This brings us to one of the most counterintuitive and frankly debated findings in recent political psychology, the science literacy paradox.
Paradox. Okay, that implies something unexpected. What's the paradox?
Well, you'd logically assume that the more scientifically literate people are, the more educated, the more competent they are at understanding civic issues.
The more likely they should be to agree on objective facts, right?
Yeah.
Especially where there's strong scientific consensus, like on climate change or vaccine safety.
That's the logical assumption. But the paradox, highlighted by researchers like Dan Kahan, shows that on issues that have become politically polarized.
Issues tied to identity.
Exactly. On those issues, higher scientific literacy or cognitive ability does not necessarily lead to greater acceptance of the scientific consensus.
Wait. Being smarter doesn't make you better at seeing the facts on these issues.
Not only does it not necessarily make you better, it can actually lead to more polarization.
How on earth does that work? That seems completely backwards.
It does seem backwards until you factor in motivated reasoning. The idea is that increased competence, being smarter, knowing more science, having better reasoning skills, doesn't necessarily get used for objective truth-seeking on these identity-charged issues.
What does it get used for, then?
It gets used as ammunition for identity defense.
Ammunition.
Yes. Kahan's research suggests that people with higher cognitive abilities are actually better at interpreting evidence in ways that confirm their existing group-aligned beliefs. They're more skilled at finding flaws in studies they don't like, better at constructing sophisticated counterarguments, better at selectively seeking out and remembering information that supports their side.
So their intelligence makes them better lawyers for their own pre-existing case, rather than objective judges of the evidence.
That's a very good analogy. They use their smarts to rationalize their preferred conclusion, the conclusion that aligns with their cultural or political identity.
Can you give a concrete example from the research data?
Sure. A classic example involves climate change beliefs. Studies found that among politically engaged individuals in the U.S., Republicans with higher levels of science literacy and numeracy were actually less likely to agree that human activity is causing global warming compared to Republicans with lower levels of science literacy.
Less likely, not more.
Less likely. The opposite was true for Democrats. Higher literacy correlated with more acceptance. It shows the polarization effect.
So why would smarter Republicans be less likely to accept the consensus?
Because, the theory goes, their higher cognitive ability allowed them to more effectively find and articulate reasons to reject the consensus view, which clashed with their group's general stance. They used their skills not to find the objective truth, but to maintain consistency with their political identity. For them, in that context, belonging was more important than being factually correct according to the scientific consensus.
That is sobering. It suggests just throwing facts at people won't work if the issue is tied up with their identity.
It often doesn't. And this motivated filtering isn't just about complex science. It extends to more straightforward political facts, too. Our sources mention research on misperceptions around the Iraq War, for example.
Right. What did that show?
It showed that citizens frequently interpreted factual evidence about the war, like whether Iraq had weapons of mass destruction before the invasion, or whether Saddam Hussein was linked to the 9/11 attacks, in ways that supported their prior beliefs about whether the war was justified or not.
So they'd read the same report but come to different conclusions based on their politics.
Essentially, yes. Or they'd be highly critical of sources that contradicted their view. And crucially, when presented with factual corrections, clear evidence showing a misperception was wrong, people whose prior beliefs were contradicted by the facts were significantly less likely to update their views compared to people whose beliefs were aligned with the facts.
So the correction just bounces off if it doesn't fit.
Often, yes. They might dismiss the source, question the methodology, or just somehow hold both the incorrect belief and the contradictory fact in their head simultaneously without resolving the conflict. It demonstrates just how powerful that motivated drive to protect one's worldview can be.
Okay, so conditioning lays the emotional groundwork, these automatic associations. Then motivated reasoning acts like a very determined bodyguard, protecting those core beliefs, especially the ones tied to our identity, by filtering and spinning incoming information.
That's a good summary so far.
But it raises a huge question. Where do those initial identity-defining beliefs, the ones we guard so fiercely, actually come from in the first place? How does that core political self get built?
Now we move to the third major piece of the puzzle, the broad, lifelong structural process of political socialization.
Socialization. That sounds like how society shapes us.
That's exactly what it is. Political socialization is generally defined as the process through which individuals acquire relatively enduring orientations towards politics in general and towards their own specific political system.
So it's how we learn the rules, the game, the values, the beliefs, the expected behaviors related to politics in our society.
Precisely. It's largely informal learning, often happening implicitly, without deliberate instruction. It structurally positions us, gives us a starting point within the political landscape.
And you said relatively enduring. That touches on a key debate in this field, right? Are the attitudes we pick up early fixed for life, or can they change?
Yes, that's the classic persistence versus plasticity debate.
Yes.
Does early socialization create an immutable value basis that structures everything else? Or do we remain open to change, capable of updating our preferences throughout our lives?
Where does the research land on that now?
The general consensus seems to be a blend. Early orientations are indeed powerful and highly enduring. They definitely provide a foundation and structure our later political lives. Think of party identification learned from parents. It often sticks.
But not always.
But not always. There is lifelong plasticity. Major life experiences, significant historical events, new social networks. These things can induce attitude change later in life. So the system is mostly persistent, but it's not completely rigid.
Okay, so those early orientations carry a lot of weight. To understand that weight, we need to know when this crucial imprinting happens. What are the impressionable years?
This is a really interesting area where the thinking has evolved. The traditional view, coming from landmark studies like those by Jennings and Niemi,
What did they find?
they looked at how political events influenced partisan affiliation across different age groups. They found the biggest impact, the greatest likelihood of events shaping long-term party loyalty, occurred during the late teens and early 20s.
So roughly age 17 to 25 was seen as the key window.
That was the traditional view, yes. The time you're coming of age, politically, maybe leaving home, starting to vote.
But you said the thinking has evolved.
It has. More recent scholarship is pushing that window, suggesting the critical period might start much earlier and maybe even extend later than we thought.
Earlier. How early?
Some research, like work cited by Van Deth and colleagues, suggests that children can show structured, consistent political orientations, often based on simple group identities or positive-negative associations as early as the first few years of primary school, around age 7 or 8.
Wow, really? So kids are already sorting the world into us and them politically even then.
It seems they might be, in rudimentary ways. And other analyses, like those by Bartels and Jackman, pinpoint the peak period of sensitivity for forming lasting attitudes somewhere between ages 7 and 17.
7 to 17. That shifts the focus significantly downward from the late teens, early 20s.
It really does. It suggests that experiences and messages received during childhood and early adolescence might be even more foundational than previously understood.
Okay, so it might start earlier. What about extending later? Why might the learning period stretch beyond the mid-20s?
This has a lot to do with changes in modern life cycles. Think about the traditional markers of adulthood that often solidify political habits and stakes in the system.
Like finishing education, starting a stable career, buying a home, getting married, having kids.
Exactly. These major life transitions are happening later for many people now compared to previous generations. The transition to full adulthood is more prolonged, more delayed.
So people are less settled in their lives until later.
Right. And because these life cycle events are important for cementing political engagement and attitudes, their delay means the period where people are still figuring out their political place, still susceptible to significant influence, might now extend well into the 30s, perhaps even up to age 35 for some aspects like participation habits.
So the window of impressionability is potentially both earlier and longer than we used to think. That's quite a shift.
It suggests socialization is a very long game indeed.
Okay, now we know roughly when this is happening. Let's get into the how. What are the actual mechanisms that build and cement these enduring political attitudes during socialization?
Researchers have proposed several key mechanisms. One really helpful way to visualize it comes from the political scientist John Zaller. He uses the analogy of a mental bookshelf.
A mental bookshelf, how does that work?
Imagine when you're young, your political bookshelf is mostly empty. The primary agents of socialization, we'll get to them in a minute, start filling that shelf with core values, basic beliefs, party identifications, general feelings about government.
Okay, they're stocking the shelf with the foundational stuff.
Right. Once that shelf gets reasonably full, maybe by early adulthood, the system tends to resist major reorganization. New information comes along.
Especially if it contradicts what's already neatly organized on the film.
Exactly. That contradictory information might just get, as Zaller colorfully put it, piled up on the floor. It's ignored, dismissed, or not integrated because it doesn't fit the existing structure. The bookshelf framework is already set.
That ties directly back to motivated reasoning, doesn't it? The structure itself facilitates the filtering.
It absolutely does. The bookshelf provides the cognitive structure that motivated reasoning defends. Another powerful mechanism, especially for political behavior, is habit formation.
Habit formation, like brushing your teeth, but for politics.
Sort of. This idea, highlighted by researchers like Eric Plutzer, focuses particularly on voter turnout. The argument is that people learn the habit of either voting or not voting relatively early in their adult lives.
And once that habit is formed, it sticks.
It tends to be very sticky. The act of voting itself is self-reinforcing. When you vote, it doesn't just express a preference. It can actually increase your positive feelings about participation, boost your sense of civic duty, and even start to change your self-image. I am the kind of person who votes.
And the opposite for non-voting.
Presumably, the habit of non-voting might reinforce feelings of alienation or a self-image of being outside the political system. The key finding is that past turnout is an incredibly strong predictor of current turnout.
Stronger than other factors.
Often stronger even than things like changes in socioeconomic status later in life. Once the habit is set, it creates its own momentum.
So we have the mental bookshelf getting stocked and habits forming. Who are the main stockists and trainers? Who are the key agents of political socialization?
Traditionally, the number one agent is considered to be the family, especially parents.
Makes sense. They're usually the first and most consistent influence. What do we primarily learn from them?
The family is seen as the main transmitter of basic political orientations, like party identification, core ideological leanings, liberal conservative, and general attitudes towards political participation.
How does that transmission happen? Is it explicit teaching?
It happens through a couple of main channels. One is explicit politicization. This means parents who actively talk about politics, express clear preferences, maybe take their kids to vote or watch the news with them. They provide consistent political signal.
Yeah, the other channel.
The other is more indirect, parental socioeconomic status. Parents' education level, income, and occupation heavily influence the child's own educational opportunities, the networks they're exposed to, and the civic resources available to them, all of which shape political engagement.
Now, there's a really interesting nuance in the research about kids from those highly politicized homes.
Right.
You'd think they just lock onto their parents' party ID and never budge.
Right, that's the intuitive thought. And they are most likely to adopt their parents' affiliation during adolescence. But research like that by Elias Dinas found something fascinating. Those same children from highly politicized families are also more likely than children from apolitical families to actually revise or even defect from their parents' party affiliation later, usually in early adulthood.
Wait, why? This seems paradoxical.
It does. The reasoning is that the very politicization that made them adopt the parents' views also made them more interested and engaged in politics overall. So when they leave home, go to college, start careers, they encounter a wider range of new information, diverse viewpoints, different political stimuli. And because they're already engaged and perhaps more politically sophisticated, they're better equipped to process this new information and potentially update or change their initial inherited views.
So the strong signal, ironically, makes them more capable of questioning that signal later.
That seems to be the dynamic. Less engaged kids from less politicized homes might just drift along with the parental affiliation without ever really examining it or encountering strong challenges to it.
That is a powerful insight into political development. Okay, after family, what's the next major agent?
The school system and civic education play a huge role.
How so? We know education level correlates with voting, but is it the classes themselves?
That's actually debated. While overall educational attainment is strongly linked to political knowledge and participation, the specific impact of the formal civic curriculum, learning about government structures, is less clear-cut in research. Some studies find effects, others don't.
So what does matter about the school experience?
What consistently seems to matter more is the climate of the classroom.
The climate, you mean like the atmosphere?
Exactly. Classrooms and schools where students feel encouraged to discuss political issues openly, where they feel their opinions are respected even if they differ, where there's a sense of free expression. Those environments tend to foster more positive civic attitudes, a greater sense of political efficacy, and a higher willingness to participate later on.
So it's less about memorizing facts and more about practicing engagement in a supportive setting.
That seems to be a key takeaway. And related to this, there's a really vital finding about who benefits most from good civic education in schools. It's called the compensation effect.
Compensation, meaning it makes up for something missing.
Precisely. Research, including that important study by Neuendorf, Niemi, and Smets, found that formal civic education in schools can effectively compensate for a lack of political discussion or resources in a student's home environment.
So for kids whose parents aren't politically engaged or maybe don't have the resources?
For those kids, the school can provide an alternative pathway to political awareness, knowledge, and engagement. It helps level the playing field, mitigating some of the disadvantages inherited from a non-politicized home. It's a crucial role for public education.
That's incredibly important for democratic equality.
Okay.
Family, school. What else shapes us politically?
You absolutely have to talk about the impact of major political events themselves.
Events. Like elections or crises?
Both. These are potent socialization agents, and their impact is often uneven across age groups.
Oh, so?
Well, think about the short-term characteristics of a specific election. Maybe the stakes feel incredibly high, or there's a uniquely charismatic candidate who inspires new people. These factors tend to influence the turnout decisions of younger citizens much more strongly than older ones.
Why the difference?
Because older voters, as we discussed with habit formation, likely already have established patterns of either voting or not voting. Their behavior is more locked in. Younger people, whose habits aren't yet fully formed, are more responsive to the immediate context of the election.
So first impressions of the political world really matter for turnout.
They seem to. And beyond specific elections, when a major critical event happens that defines a historical period, it can leave an indelible mark on the generation experiencing it during their formative years.
Creating a cohort effect.
Exactly. The classic example often cited is the Vietnam War draft lottery in the U.S. Research showed that the direct personal experience of being subject to the draft had lasting, distinct effects on the political attitudes, things like trust in government, feelings about military intervention, and the participation rates of the young men directly impacted.
And that impact was different than for older people living through the same war.
Yes, because it hit the younger cohort during that critical impressionable years window. It shaped their fundamental political outlook in a way that it didn't reshape the already established views of older generations. These shared critical experiences become part of a generation's collective political identity.
This idea of different forces aging, historical events, generational experiences, all shaping attitudes, brings us neatly to the big framework for understanding long-term change, doesn't it?
It does. It leads us to the age, period, and cohort model, often just called the APC model.
APC. Okay, break that down for us. What does it help us analyze?
The APC model is really the gold standard for disentangling the different sources of change in attitudes or behaviors across society over long periods. It recognizes that any snapshot of public opinion is influenced by three distinct forces operating simultaneously.
Force number one, age.
Right. Age effects, sometimes called life cycle effects. These are changes related to the process of aging itself, the typical experiences people have as they move through different life stages.
So things that tend to happen to most people as they get older.
Exactly. We already mentioned one classic example, the inverted U-shaped pattern for voter turnout.
Right. Low and young.
Low and young, often due to fewer resources, less integration into the community, maybe lower interest.
Then it rises in middle age.
Rises and stabilizes at a higher level in middle age as people become more settled, have more stakes in society like jobs and property, maybe families.
And then potentially declines later in life.
And often drops off again in older age, possibly due to health issues, retirement, leading to less social connection, maybe loss of a spouse. That pattern is primarily driven by age or life cycle stage.
Okay, that's age. What's the P in APC?
P stands for period effects. These are influences related to major historical events or broad societal shifts that impact everyone living through that period, regardless of their age.
So something big happens that affects the whole population at the same time.
Precisely. Think about the impact of the September 11th attacks on feelings about national security, or the 2008 financial crisis on attitudes towards economic regulation, or a global event like the COVID-19 pandemic on views of public health and government power. These events create shifts across the board, affecting young and old simultaneously, because everyone experiences them within the same historical context.
Got it. Age is individual life stage. Period is a society-wide event. That leaves C.
C is for cohort effects, sometimes called generational effects. These are the lasting differences between groups of people who were born around the same time and therefore experienced the same historical events during their crucial formative or impressionable years.
So this captures that imprinting idea we talked about with the Vietnam draft.
Exactly. A cohort shares a common set of formative experiences that shape their collective outlook in ways that distinguish them from earlier or later cohorts throughout their lives. People who came of age during the Great Depression might have persistently different views on thrift and government safety nets than those who came of age during the booming 1990s. That difference is a cohort effect.
So age is moving through life. Period is what happens to everyone now. Cohort is what happened when your generation was young.
That's a great way to summarize the three forces. And analyzing them together helps us understand complex trends.
Can we walk through an example to see how APC plays out in practice? The source materials used a really clear one regarding attitudes towards interracial marriage.
Yes, that's an excellent case study using data tracking attitudes in the U.S. from roughly 1972 to 2004. It beautifully illustrates the interplay, especially the powerful, slow-moving force of generational replacement.
Okay, so what did the data show? Is there a period effect?
Definitely. There was a clear period effect. Over that 3-decade span, all cohorts surveyed, young, middle-aged, old, became significantly less intolerant towards interracial marriage. Society as a whole was changing.
One might drive a period effect like that.
Things like changing media portrayals, landmark legal decisions, increased social contact between groups, evolving cultural norms factors affecting everyone living through that time period, pushing society-wide attitudes in a more tolerant direction.
Okay, so everyone got more tolerant over time. Was there a cohort effect?
Yes, a very strong cohort effect was also evident. When you compared different generations at the same age, each successive cohort, those born later, started out significantly less intolerant than the cohort that came before it.
So people born in, say, the 1960s were less intolerant in their 20s than people born in the 1940s were when they were in their 20s.
Exactly. Their formative years occurred during or after the main thrust of the civil rights movement. They were socialized with different norms and values regarding race compared to earlier generations. That baseline difference is the cohort effect.
So we have a period effect, making everyone more tolerant, and a cohort effect, meaning each new generation starts out more tolerant. How does that explain the overall big drop in opposition to interracial marriage?
That's where generational replacement comes in. The primary reason for the steep decline in overall intolerance across the entire population was that the older, more intolerant cohorts
What was one socialized in an earlier era?
were gradually dying and leaving the population, or at least the electorate. And they were being replaced by younger, much more tolerant cohorts entering adulthood.
So the average kept dropping because the makeup of the population was changing.
Precisely. While individuals within each cohort became somewhat more tolerant over time, the period effect, the biggest driver of the overall societal shift was the simple demographic replacement of older generations by newer ones with fundamentally different starting points, the cohort effect.
That really highlights how social change can be slow but profound, driven by these overlapping APC forces.
Right.
It's not just individuals changing their minds, but the population itself changing.
It's a crucial dynamic for understanding long-term trends in public opinion and political behavior. It shows how history weighs on the present through these cohort legacies.
Wow. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground, from the subconscious associations of conditioning,
To the identity defenses of motivated reasoning.
and now the lifelong shaping process of political socialization, influenced by age, period, and cohort. When you put it all together, it paints a picture of political attitudes that is far more complex than just simple, rational choices made in the moment.
Absolutely. It suggests our political selves are these intricate structures. They're built on a foundation of conditioned emotional responses, often laid down early and outside our awareness,
Then fortified.
then fortified by motivated reasoning, which fiercely defends our sense of identity by filtering, interpreting, and sometimes rejecting information that doesn't fit.
And the whole structure is profoundly shaped by our socialization to raise us, where we went to school, and maybe just the sheer luck of which historical events unfolded during our most impressionable years.
It really underscores how much of our political orientation is shaped by forces beyond pure, detached reason.
And the research isn't stopping here, right? What are some of the future directions mentioned?
Well, there's ongoing work trying to connect these psychological and sociological findings more deeply with biology exploring potential genetic predispositions towards certain attitudes or ideologies. That's a complex and sometimes controversial area.
Nature and nurture interacting.
Exactly. And methodologically, researchers are always trying to get better data, especially longitudinal panel data tracking the same individuals over many years to more rigorously tease apart those age, period, and cohort effects across a wider range of political beliefs and behaviors, moving beyond just party ID or basic values.
So, continuing to refine our understanding of these deep currents.
It's a field that constantly challenges that Enlightenment ideal of the perfectly rational, independent citizen, doesn't it?
It certainly does.
No.
And it leaves us, and you, the listener, with a really provocative question to ponder. It brings us right back to that fundamental tension we started with, passive learning versus rational choice.
Where do you draw the line?
Yeah. Here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
If you accept that our deepest political beliefs are this complex blend shaped by maybe accidental childhood conditioning, fiercely guarded by our need to belong and protect our identity, and significantly influenced by the historical lottery of when we happen to be young,
If all those non-rational factors are in the mix,
then honestly, what percentage of your own core political outlook, the beliefs you hold most dear, do you truly think is a product of purely objective, dispassionate, rational choice? How much is reason and how much is everything else? Something to think about.